half full or half empty, just to start? How many people think half full? How many think half empty? Very specific. Actually, there is a correct answer. And this is a very important correct answer. The answer is that the glass is completely full. Because after all, it's half full of liquid and half full of air. And the reason why I'm starting with this is that it will turn out that the optimists are right. In fact, the air is overflowing. The super optimists are right. And so this is why I'm going to share with you my journey, my story, and also give you some tips for you can help myself on my journey as well. Because my journey is one that I think many of you will share. So I decided that I exist to change the entire world for better, all of it at the same time, ideally, and this is where it goes a little fuzzy, without anybody knowing that it's me. And I'm in year 8 of a 25-year plan, and I'm ahead of schedule. I won an award from the World Economic Forum, a Technology Pioneer Award. I'd taken my company public. I was one of the founders and creators of collective intelligence and crowdsourcing. I'd done all kinds of amazing things, but I was extremely bored of myself. I found everything was extremely easy. And when you find things are extremely easy, you begin to sort of challenge yourself to do more and more bigger and bigger things. So I was nominated a Technology Pioneer, and I had an opportunity to go to the World Economic Forum at Davos in 2008. And I thought, well, okay, if I'm going to go there, I will actually work out a plan to change the entire world for better. Now, I'm not a visionary. I'm not somebody that believes in these beautiful dreams. I like actually doing stuff. So I sat down and worked out a practical plan of how you would change the world for better, all of it at the same time in 25 years, ideally without anybody knowing that it's me. Now, there is some science to this, and I know that some of you might be skeptical at this point. But I was looking at things like behavioral science, the sort of knowledge about how people behave and actually testing it. Complex systems, phenomenal body of research on how systems work that are complex and dynamic. Networks, we're talking about networks, but networks also play a big role in making change in the world at scale. Things like abundance. We don't live in a world where there's just 10 people thinking about things. We're living in a world where there's 1,000, 30,000, 1 million, 50 million people all doing things where we can play with the power of abundance. Collective intelligence. How can we become smart as a planet? Because at the moment, we really aren't very smart, even though we all have the tools to do so. And then synchronization. How can we actually sort of coordinate our power to have change at a big scale? Now, obviously, this was a big plan, and going back to it, I deliberately came up with my initial plan, which is called plausibly ridiculous. So I could spend 3 or 4 years testing the model out, but doing it in a way that people could laugh at me. They could think I was ridiculous. This was entirely on purpose. Because I'm extremely transparent, I'm extremely honest, I will always give you the honest answer to any question. But in this thing, I managed to find a way of describing what I did, the projects that I worked on, so that the people that were smart enough could see through the plausibly ridiculous and realize there was actually something big here. Now, at this point, though, it's good to have a proof point. So, 2008. When I was at Davos, I was sitting in a shuttle bus ride, and I meet a guy from Zimbabwe. And he was a politician. He says, okay, here's our problem. We'd like to have a fair count of the vote in 2008 in Zimbabwe, but we know that it's not really going to be a really fair count. Can you help? So I said, of course I can. My first rule is called It's All Easy. And so even though I knew nothing about Zimbabwe, I knew nothing about elections, I'd only had 2 hours of sleep, I said, okay, let's figure out how to do this. And by understanding how the system worked, we very quickly worked out that we could use a method called crowdsourced election monitoring. In the end, 1,000 people, members of the political party and sort of citizens, had camera phones. This is 2008 in Zimbabwe, no Facebook, no Twitter. But they stood outside the polling stations, and this is one of the pictures that they took. So you had 1,000 people outside the biggest polling stations, and within just a few hours, we counted millions of votes with physical evidence and put a press release out to a very skeptical world press to say a group of anonymous activists have counted the election vote, and Robert Mugabe cannot win the first round of the election. And that's the only reason why he lost. That took 45 minutes of planning and 10 hours of execution for 0 budget. Plausibly ridiculous. Some of you may think this is a ridiculous thing, but this is a truthful thing. If you can do it once, you can do it again. This is 2011, this is Libya. I did some stuff in Libya. This particular one was the Libyan rebels had run out of cash. So how can you somehow persuade banks across Europe to give cash to the rebels? If you run out of cash in that situation, there's no food, there's no gasoline. It would have been sort of even worse than it was. So one of the things that was done was, how do you put public pressure on banking regulators and some key members of the banking community to basically persuade them to give a loan to the Libyan rebels in the middle of the war? So this was done. This is May 2011. A non-profit called Global Witness leaked to the world press the Libyan Investment Authority's management accounts, detailing 50 billion plus worth of assets, every stock, bond, trade, relative performance over time. That was leaked to the world press. Let's see. I got the document on Thursday morning. I was the leak. It went to my friend who lives in my network. Global Witness is one of my colleagues. That then went out to the global press by Tuesday. By Wednesday, it was on almost every single business publication in the world. And 1 week later, an Italian bank gives them an undisclosed amount of money, somewhere about $200 million of loan to the rebels. That took 10 minutes of planning on a bus at Grunewald in Berlin. Now, at this point, plausibly ridiculous. I can say these things and we can laugh about them, but it's all true. And what I began to realize in looking at this, so this is my version of a Nietzsche quote. I'm not highfalutin in my thinking, but this is my version. There were those that danced and those that did not dance. The ones that did not dance did not hear the music. It turns out there is a different way of looking at the world, a different set of rules of looking at the world that is fundamentally different to what everybody else is doing. And as I look around, let's say, my community of the deviants, the people that are doing things differently, it turns out we all have a very similar set of rules. And what we now need to do is we need to scale up the application of these rules to help make change in the world much faster. Now, this is not the time and place for me to describe the 25-year plan to change the world. Maybe another day, another occasion. But of course, another day, another occasion. But right now, I just want to focus on one specific area, one that will be useful to you as individuals, as organizations, but also as part of this sort of bigger way of looking at the world, and that's networks. So we're going to focus just on the network piece. I deliberately put in pictures of animals. If you look at networks, why do networks exist? Well, it turns out one of the reasons why networks exist is that we have a preference of hanging out with people that are similar to us, and then we want to be close to them in preference to being close to anybody else. Networks. These are lovely meerkats. Humans are just like that. Now, what's interesting, because we conserve energy by connecting with people that we feel affiliated with. Now, there are many different types of networks. Companies are networks. University groups are networks. Professional associations, communities like the global shapers of the World Economic Forum, these are all networks that exist. And then out of preference, you'd rather hang out with people in your network than anybody else. Well, a network then has structures to it. So if you look at a network structure, you have links between the connections. Already we can see here in a map of San Francisco, there are certain places which are hubs of communication. Almost all the communication goes through a single place and then spits it out. It turns out there is a science behind networks. Within there, you have different elements play roles. Some roles, their job is to amplify, that a message would go in, and it makes it louder when it goes out. Other times, there are things when it it stops the messages from sort of propagating. So these are basically structures of a network. What's also more interesting with a network is how do you activate a network? How do you get networks to actually go do stuff? And so I've got some examples we can see about how networks were used, some by accident, but then some others on purpose, as an explicit set of tools of using networks. Now, some of you may know this. This is the I Stand with Ahmed. So 14-year-old Ahmed Mohammed went into his school with his little clock. He made his own clock. The police thought it was a bomb. Now, what was very interesting with this is that this picture came out the day afterwards. He was covered on the Dallas Morning News that same night, just to say police have not found a terrorist. He's just a child with a cool clock. Overnight, 4 o'clock in the morning then, a woman then says, I stand with Ahmed. She'd watched the TV show. She was in Dallas. Right now, one of the friends then posted a picture through his sister saying, like, this is me and this is me getting carted off and just been arrested. What's fascinating then is the power of networks. How very quickly, I mean, this is POTUS, President Obama, at 7 p.m. at night that next day, he already said, come to the White House. You have Twitter offering an internship at 11:30. Very quickly, with these reference networks, this thing spreads like crazy through networks. Now, what's interesting, though, is that this is done by accident. So there's other ways that it can be done on purpose. This is something called the Global Teacher Prize, which is a $1 million prize from the Varkey Foundation. The goal of this prize is to find role models for great teachers around the world, to celebrate great teachers, almost like create these new role models for what great looks like, across all different walks of teaching, from primary to secondary, across every country. But then we're really thinking about how can we use networks to do this. For instance, one of the ways of doing it is that there are already country-based prizes for finding great teachers in Uganda, in Ghana, in Asia Pacific. So right now, we reached out to everybody who already ran a teacher prize to say, your best candidates should come into this global prize faster. Another network tactic is that find networks of teachers. Or we can quite quickly think of trade unions. We can think of NGOs. There's associations of physics teachers, and there's an international association. So by deliberately having a network strategy, we were able to reach out to a small number of people that control the hubs of the networks and ask them to share. And the result was very impressive. Now, I won't show the video. I do cry every time I see the video because there's such moving stories. But here we ended up with 10 finalists that represented pretty much every continent, different types of teaching. There's Fala, who sort of pretty much created the teaching of the blind in Cambodia. These were amazing stories that they get spread in networks. And as we're in the second year of the prize, this is then able to spread further and further to actually make change across the whole teaching profession in the world. Networks is a key piece. Another one, recent thing here is the refugee crisis that we have in Europe. Well, one of the things that people practically say is, okay, how can I help? What's interesting then is that the science of networks can help us even then. Logically speaking, there are hubs of communication. This stuff isn't random. Quite quickly, people will create, in today's day and age, a Facebook page. And this is the Calais one for the UK camps, people waiting to get into the UK. And quite quickly, anybody who was interested in helping was directed here. Now, what's interesting with the way that the network hub works is that people then posted their information and their content in the same place. If you want to know the 10 NGOs in Calais that are helping, all of their contact details are here. You've got the eyes and ears, people saying, I've just been to Calais, here are pictures of my trip, you need to speak to this person, and by the way, don't send pasta because they don't like it and it doesn't cook properly. These are practical uses of the power of networks. Now, when we do think about networks, some of you will be thinking about social networks, computers, or about networking, this sort of, hi, here's my card, here we go. This is one of my 50 boxes of cards from other people, by the way. What's interesting, though, LinkedIn looks like a network, but it is not a network. LinkedIn is a collection of business cards. There's no concept of saying, I'm a member of LinkedIn, and I'm proud to do whatever of course not. It's a collection of business cards. It's almost like the least amount of effort. In fact, the average amount of time people spend on LinkedIn is just 1 minute a day. And yet, if you look at other ways of looking at networks, these communities like global shapers from the World Economic Forum, young global leaders, this is when people spend significant amounts of time and effort to really bond and connect. What I'm calling trusted networks. It dramatically increases the likelihood that you can do something that could help other people. Now, I'm going to just give you a very quick, simple toolkit for you to do this thing. It's not rocket science. It's not. I breathe the same air as you do. I drink the same water as you do. Half of it, 3/4. And here's the simple rules. I mean, this stuff isn't that hard. It's just uncommon knowledge. We have to start with an end goal. What is it that you really want to do? If you do not have an end goal, you do not know which direction to go in, how fast you should go, how much effort to put in. You must have an end goal. If you do not have an end goal, then find one. Then you need to understand the system it is that you're trying to affect. Ask a few probing questions. The simplest way of doing, if you're doing any kind of social good, follow the money is a good way of understanding any system. But once you understand the system, you understand where does the power exist, who wants what will happen next. Based on that, you can then quite quickly work out which are the networks that you can tap into to ask for help. So right now, all of these different methods that I'm doing, in the Zimbabwe story, this was then the political party, the MDC, where 15,000 supporters were asked, do you have a camera phone, are you willing to help? So that took half an hour to find 1,000 people with camera phones. These tactics are very simple. Then you've got to pick the method of actually going into those networks, and then put your plan into action. This is not rocket science. This stuff is actually, looking at the world of networks is so much more effective than any other way. So let's just step back again and just sort of think and reflect on this. We've worked out that the optimists are right. But then also, looking at a plan of changing the world, part of me is deeply frustrated, and that we have the brain power, whether it's in the room, whether it's in the sort of the communities that we're in, to pretty much solve and address any problem. And yet at the moment, we as humanity have kind of decided to be stupid. But that has to stop, and it's stopping anyway. I see this knowledge about how systems work, and particularly how we can use networks. Within these networks, particularly within these trusted networks, we can find people that can help us almost instantly. We can get involved so we can offer our help. So we can actually make change locally and globally very, very rapidly. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. Thank you.